Morning everybody, and welcome to this this live chit chat with Dr. Katharine Pace Miles. Wonderful to have you joining us this morning. So as I mentioned to you prior to the chat, I had the privilege of listening to a workshop of yours in Syracuse at the Reading League last year, and since then have been sort of following your research and following your work, which I'm going to say about words, because I really want to sort of pick up this thing about words as opposed to us compartmentalising, as we chatted before we came on. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Katie's work, Dr. Katharine Pace Miles is an associate professor at Brooklyn College City University of New York. Dr. Miles's research interests include orthographic mapping, high-frequency word learning, reading interventions, and literacy instruction that is both developmentally appropriate and grounded in the science of reading. Dr. Miles is the academic advisor for Reading Go, an evidence-based intervention for first and second grade students. She is the author of Reading Ready, an explicit and systematic word reading curriculum for kindergarten and first grade students. Dr. Miles is also the co-founder and principal investigator for CUNY Reading Corps, awesome, which stands for City University, New York, yeah? So this is a pre-service teacher training and provides high-dosage tutoring to historically underserved New York City students. Dr. Miles's latest projects involve opening new advanced graduate coursework in reading science and finding more ways to bring free tutoring to emergent readers in need of support. Wow, amazing, amazing. And just before we were coming on, you were sharing with me about how some of that work is actually being picked up across our end of the world. So Katie, that's just must be such an incredible honour for you to have some of your work recognised, particularly in Australia by La Trobe University. We're talking about introducing those terms when you begin your chats, and with specific reference to high frequency words was kind of where we had landed, and you were talking, Katie, about whether or not those those words are read by or read to. That was kind of where you got up to in your brief with me. So should we just go back to, you had that little list of different word terms. Can we go back there and bring people in? So when you normally begin your chat, you would talk about frequency words, and I'll hand over to you because you're the expert, not me.
Yes, so I was just saying that I give this list of terms. So in the schools, they're often called sight words. In my own children's school, they're called sight words. Researchers refer to them as high-frequency words. Often, though, within that bucket, you could think about, are they regular or irregularly spelled words? Are they decodable or not decodable words? I've done some research on, are they content or function words? Mm-hmm. And then I talked with some teachers around, they consider vocabulary words their sight words, or they lump those two things together. So really a confusing pile of terminology, and it matters when you think about what you're trying to do with those words. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Yeah. When you say, Katie, it matters in terms of what we're trying to do with those words. Tell us more about what you mean by it matters.
Well, it matters, especially with regards to decodability, right? Because high-frequency words, as I mentioned, high-frequency words are just words that are used a lot. And your instruction for high-frequency words should be aligned to your instruction for all words, which is what we know from the field, is that analyzing letter-sound correspondences matters with regards to anchoring the word in memory, and this comes from Airy's theory of orthographic mapping. And so it's not like you take this set of words, they would be high-frequency words, and if you determine that this set of high-frequency words that are in front of you are irregularly spelled, it's not like you should say, okay, those are other than. I should do something else with them. No, it's really, we know what good instruction looks like for word learning, and we can apply it to all words And also, it's important to note that with regards to decodability, I've done several analyses on this, and a more recent one I did with my colleague Denise Eig and Janae Butler. We were analyzing the orthographic regularity of high-frequency words, and we found that if you apply a certain number of graphophonetic or letter-sound correspondences and a certain number of spelling rules, you can get to the point where 99% of the words are regular or decodable. And so that would shift all of these words out of this idea of like, oh, high-frequency words are irregular or not decodable. No, if you teach your phonics scope and sequence, and if it's a robust one, you're going to get to the point where almost all of those words are decodable. And even when they're not decodable, I'm sorry to just keep going on this thread, because even when there's an aspect of that word that is irregular based on your phonics scope and sequence, it's a graphophonetic connection, a letter sound connection that you're not going to teach, even when that's the case, you should still anchor the rest of the word in its letter sound correspondences, because it's really useful information.
Yeah, so when I'm listening to you, I get this notion that somewhat we need to stick to that as our baseline for teaching words, and I know we've talked before coming on about kind of going into discussing the importance of setting good early word reading habits. We talked about, that. But can you just help me to understand if teachers, and I'm way generalizing here, I acknowledge this, Katie, but if teachers really understood that the brain learns to read through the process of orthographic mapping for all words, would that help clear the misconceptions around kind of compartmentalizing words into different categories? Or would that go some way towards that?
I would absolutely go, I think, a significant way towards that. There's no doubt about it. I think if we could clear up that misconception, I think that, coupled with making sure that our most emergent readers are experiencing word reading with words that they have the skills to decode, I think those two things in combination would go really far.
Oh,
so you're
gosh.
setting strong word reading habits early on, and then as you're getting into a larger corpus of high-frequency words, you are aligning those high-frequency words to your phonics scope and sequence. So you're pulling those words off the list and giving students experiences with those words that they're ready to decode.
Yeah. We have to go there now, don't we? We have to go from this little piece of information to what we talked about prior about, setting good early word reading habits. So I know you were just sharing with me too, you've got a 4-year-old that is learning to become a reader. So can you tell us what is really, really important about setting good early word reading habits, and what is it that you wish every teacher across the globe could know about that?
Wow, well,
Good
that is an
question,
incredible
isn't
question.
it?
So the most successful things that have worked, and I can say this anecdotally for my own 2 children who I taught to read at the age of 4, but I can also speak to it with regards to this free program that we use all across New York City with emergent readers. What we do is we control, right? We take a certain number of letter-sound combinations that we know the students have mastered, and then we create all of the different combinations that we can with those words. We make sure that they're successful with reading those words in isolation. We move those words into decodable sentences. We're then positioning that student. After that student has built up their confidence in isolation, in the sentence, at the sentence level, then we're putting them into the decodable text. It's not just this, okay, you can read that word, now go read that text. It just takes more than that. It's a real confidence builder. And you can get there. It takes time, though. It takes patience. It takes time. It takes some level of automaticity for the student to feel successful reading that decodable book. They have to have some level of fluidity so they don't constantly see the word reading as a slog. Now, you know, my 4-year-old absolutely doing, he just read, you know, something about a bus, you know, they met someone at a bus or something like that, and, you know, he was doing his little bus, you know, but he was getting it because some of the other words were coming faster, and then he would stop and he would do his laborious letter sound matching on those words, but he was motivated. He was not in a constant state of frustration.
Did the motivation come from the fact that he'd previously had success? You know, so he knew that that was his way in.
That is definitely the way in. He's had lots of success, weeks of success, really, doing all different kinds of word analysis, word analytic work, you know, with me, moving letters around, you know, feeling good like he could make a word with his magnetic letters, using his wipey marker and his wipey board and doing word chains, all different kinds of stuff, reading words in very simple sentences, which gave him immense confidence. And then we set our sights on the very simple decodable books.
So, Katie,
you know,
no, sorry, you carry on. You were going to say,
I just wanted to say, I know we talked about this too, this like social impact, this like social justice thing too. I just want to acknowledge too, it really requires us as a society to think about what our most emergent readers need with regards to the level of support we give them when they are at this emergent phase, in the most emergent moments of the emergent phase. And for so many of those kids, my own children, they needed some type of one-on-one. And so I just want to acknowledge that, and it's really, I'm in this whole headspace here in New York around, are our school systems really designed to meet the needs of our most emergent students, to set them up for success, so that we can start early positive word reading habits, successful word reading habits.
And that in a different area in terms of implementation as opposed to research is where our work sits too. And I think, you know, as you're saying that, straight away I get these steps sitting in my head, and they look like something of, you know, do all teachers understand how the brain learns to read? Do all teachers understand that orthographic mapping process? Do all teachers have access to a quality scope and sequence? But further to that, one of the things that I really picked up that you consciously or unconsciously, maybe somewhat naturally due to your research and your and your reading program that you've developed for emergent readers, is really evident when you were talking, is the careful curation of a very tight lesson sequence. You really talked of a careful curation of a tight lesson sequence, and making sure, I imagine that you will have been, you know, really working towards building automaticity with sound to symbol correspondence and isolation, and then coming into word level. So really carefully building that cognitive load to allow for motivation and success, and making sure that those graphemes and those words are able to pop off the page.
That's exactly it. I'm obsessed. I'm really obsessed with that.
Thank you. Really we're grateful for your obsession.
I really am. It's that type, that control, that mastery building. You got it. And I work with so many students who are actually in first and second grade. Of my intervention work focuses primarily on those grades, and those students have fallen behind right out of the gate. And that's because in our kindergarten, that's our 5-year-olds who then turn 6, our first graders are our 6-year-olds turning 7. Our students fell behind because it seems like in the pre-K and kindergarten space, there was just this very like, good luck with the high frequency words. Let's memorize as many of these as we can. Not a real rhyme or reason, not a thoughtful consideration about word reading habits. It just has felt so loose and like sending students off into the wilderness, and some students figure it out and others don't. And it works if you just give them an opportunity to master some of these correspondences and apply them. It works, and it builds.
Yeah.
And exponentially, you're up and on, as we know, with your reading.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I wanted to ask too around this, so what you have sort of explained is the importance of a very tightly curated lesson sequence. And then, so it's, phoning to grapheme correspondence, and then taking that set of letters into words, and then you really pushed around the, making sure they've got those, and then going into sentence, and then into the text once they've got that. I think that lesson sequence is something that teachers are increasingly really, really aware of and are practicing in New Zealand, Katie. I wanted to ask about the reciprocity of decoding and encoding, or reading and writing throughout that process. And is that something in your research that you have focused on, or is it more been the decoding piece itself?
What a fabulous question. So I had focused, and I just actually got off a series of calls where we are adding more encoding, more dictation into our protocol, because I originally wrote this protocol for our most emergent readers, where, as those of us who work with very young students, we estimated spellings. Previously we called them invented spellings, right? Estimated spellings. Those were used and encouraged, and then you could actually get your accurate word reading off the ground while your estimated spellings were coming along and whatnot. And so when I wrote this protocol, there is encoding that happens within the protocol, but not as much as what I'm seeing once the program is used as an intervention. I've been gathering data, and I've really decided I need to add more dictation. So now with the decodable sentences, so in the word analysis part, you are doing your word analysis and you're doing your encoding there. When you then go to your decodable book reading, we're also adding dictation where you are, the teacher is stating one of these decodable sentences, and then you are writing the sentence. And we're adding also, I believe it's at the end of the decodable book reading, also a sentence writing component there. It's critical.
Yeah.
It's critical to have this reciprocity, and it's also, there's a time situation here too. So how much time? At one point we had a very limited time for our interventions, and so we prioritized getting as much decoding off the ground as possible. And now that we've proven that yes, this approach can work, we're being given more space, more time to work with students. So now we can add that in.
And then what about measuring gains, and monitoring progress throughout that? Is that something that teachers and parents, or whoever's supporting these emergent readers, is that something that we should be really, really consciously, I'm going to say, tracking, as we're progressing as well?
Absolutely. So in our, I'll call it our tutoring protocols, so we have very basic phoneme segmentation and non-word reading tasks, I'll call them assessment tasks, that students do to determine which of the units the student should enter into, right? From there, we track every single lesson. You can think of it as a lesson or a session. We track every single one, and we track whether that student, you put a little, very simple. I do this work with the pre-service teachers, we call them. These are university students. The university students are the ones who are doing the tutoring.
Yes.
And so it's not like I'm dealing with a master teacher, right? So I say this to say everyone can do this. But we're tracking every single lesson and putting a check mark to say, yes, they got through all 4 target items in the word mapping task, right, of these phonetic elements. And they got it, and so now we can move on. And when they don't get it, we know we need to repeat, or we need to go to the next set. Exactly. And we have this whole cycle approach where there's 3 sets of target items. And if by the end of those 3 sets your student needs more, you go back, you repeat all 3 sets. So this concept of really making sure students have opportunities to master these concepts in a controlled, low-stakes environment, with, again, we do so much of this one-on-one or in a 2-to-1 format, 2 students, 1 tutor, 1 teacher.
But even in a classroom
Yeah.
setting, I think if we have, you know, the fundamentals set up, if we have the design of lesson structure or lesson sequence really, really tight and curated, like you've said, and we understand the reciprocity between the decoding and encoding, we build that teacher knowledge around the process of orthographic mapping for all words, we're going to do so much better for these emergent readers en masse, right?
Absolutely, absolutely, right? You put in, it's like anything in life, you put in the time, energy, you think about it so thoughtfully at the onset, it pays out tenfold later on.
Yeah.
It really does. You know, and one of the, I know we were going to talk about high frequency words, but it's all wrapped into this, because one of the things, some of the listeners may be saying, well, you know, I'm sure you're using some irregular high frequency words. And the truth of the matter is, in this little program, I give it out for free to universities so that university students can use it to tutor. I wrote 30 to 60 tutoring sessions or lessons with only 6 irregular high frequency words. I just, 6 over 60 lessons or 6 over 30 lessons, I just limited it so much to make sure, you know, and the words are like, you know, I just limited it so much because what I was seeing around New York was just a lot of emphasis on these lists of high frequency words. And so I just really didn't want to perpetuate that.
Yeah. I think one of the things I've just written down on my piece of paper, be sure to make sure New Zealand universities know about that free resource for pre-service teachers.
That's right. That's right. Like we were saying, a university in Australia is using it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Life's work now. Just think about it. I want to make sure pre-service teachers know, and they have resources to do at least one thing really, really well. They do lots of things well in their career, but I want to make sure everyone comes out of pre-service teaching knowing if I have an emergent reader in front of me, it doesn't matter the age, I know that they have to do these sorts of anchoring exercises in order to get these words mapped in memory.
Yeah. And if we have a profession of teachers coming out able to work with those emergent readers who are having great difficulty, that will set them up. I mean, obviously that's your intention. I have another question that's kind of stemmed from this, Katie. So unfortunately in New Zealand we still have quite a presence of reading recovery and whole language instruction, and one of the things that I wonder about, is there a direct correlation? Well, I kind of know the answer to this, but I want to raise it. You know, is it okay for me to make the assumption that how an emergent reader presents in terms of their need, their potential challenges, is it likely to be exactly the same for a reader who is 6 or 7 years old and hasn't learnt those fundamentals and orthographically mapped sound to symbol correspondences in isolation at word level, at sentence level? So we run the risk here in New Zealand of maintaining some of those whole language interventions for 6-year-olds, and I have grave concern with that.
Oh, I would have the same concerns. I really would. No, yeah, I couldn't be more concerned, actually. It just really perpetuates the problem, right? If students have been in this whole language environment, and then their intervention is a whole language type of intervention, I think is what you're telling me, that is essentially doubling down on ineffective instruction for them. It's really the exact opposite of what they need.
And then I was just going to say, then in some cases we have, you know, in their Tier 1 instruction, it is more in line with what you're talking about, but then also if the available intervention isn't corresponding or aligning with that, that's a real risk as well.
Terrible risk. Terrible risk. I see this a lot, the unlearning, right? So it's maybe they're in Tier 1 and they're going to get a little bit of this grapheme phoneme knowledge, this word analysis knowledge, but then they go and they work in this small group and they're being taught the opposite of that. You know, that's really concerning. And students really, you know, that intervention time is such a special time for them. Whoever, you know, that seems like something, you know, also a lot of students I work with, they have difficulty attending to the whole group instruction. They might be, you know, a little disconnected to it. They may have some attention things going on, and they go into the small group. That's where they can focus better. That's where they may have a closer bond with the teacher or the instructor. And that's really what they're holding on to when they go back into the classroom or when they go home at night and they're trying to read to their caregivers. Yeah, no, we're not setting them up for success. And research, you know, research has shown this. We all are aware of the research on, you know, the impacts of having a strong phonics scope and sequence. We know all of this about structured literacy. We even have it very specifically about high-frequency words, right? If you're using an analytic approach with high-frequency words, even if it was just that, talking about my colleague Danielle Kohlenbrander's work, or even if they are spelling, getting really good practice spelling these words and doing a mispronunciation analysis, that has been more effective than just memorizing the whole words. Or Murray's work, where they're taking an analytic approach, very cool approach, where they're giving students popsicle sticks and they pretend like the pencil is a bit of a surgical tool or whatnot, and they're trying to find the hierarchical pieces or the vowel units or whatnot in the word and doing some fun analysis work. It works. It works. It's been very beneficial to students to think about what skills they have and how they can apply them to the structure, the orthographic structure of composition of the word in front of them, and how they can figure it out. They've got tools that they can use. And I don't mean the popsicle sticks. I mean the tools.
Because they're going to use it, aren't they, and transfer it. And hopefully that leads into that self-teaching theory of, you know, they've got enough there to be able to go again. And I think that's what we have to understand. Can I just ask you really succinctly to explain for us the term set for variability? I don't believe it's a term that we're all really widely across, and I just think it would be good for you to, just picking up on what you've just shared with us around that word analysis and then kind of picking up the word.
Sure. So one of the ways I talk about set for variability in my grad courses is I talk about how if you have a word in memory, and right, you have it in your lexicon, let's say, the word mitten, we're in New York, we're constantly wearing gloves or mittens and whatnot, and if you have that word in your vocabulary somewhere, when you come upon the word mit-10 and you're trying to apply your very good CVC and, you know, you slash it between your syllabic work, your multisyllable work, you're slashing between the double T's, mit-10. And I always use this example because I'll never forget when I was with a reader who did that. Mit-10, what? Like, what is mit? Well, set for variability will kick in if you have it, and you'll say, okay, let's try flexing these vowels, let's try adjusting some of this, and you can get to the word mitten so long as it's in your vernacular.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very, I love that you talked about self-teaching. I love talking about set for variability. I also love talking about Seidenberg's statistical learning. Like, we do have these cognitive mechanisms, all three of these, which will do something similar, which is along the lines of, like, if you teach enough, or if you have enough knowledge, like the word mitten, if you have enough of this, you have the capacity to solve a lot of these decoding juggernauts that are going to be thrown at you. Self-teaching will kick in. Set for variability or statistical learning will kick in.
And Katie, am I right in saying that we don't yet know, or there's no real kind of middle ground around knowing how much individuals need of that? Because we are different. There are so many different cognitive factors that come into the domain of reading. So what I need and what I bring to my ability to just work with word level or to go into set for variability, obviously there's huge vocabulary implications there. My ability to self-teach my ability for statistical learning to come into play. There are so many other factors going on. So we can't, in a granular way, know exactly what's in the head from a cognitive perspective of every learner, right? So we're trying to we're trying to find, I don't know if this is the right term, a strong research and evidence-based middle ground that we know if all students are taught through the process of orthographic mapping, lots of word analysis, lots and lots of repetition through decoding, code, decode at sound, word, sentence, text level for those emergent readers, we will have greater success at building a society of strong, literate people.
That's exactly right. You couple that with rich background knowledge building, and that I do think that that's the recipe for success. And you are absolutely right that we don't know what the combinations are for each learner, and that this is very idiosyncratic. And there's two very simple little equations that I use when I give my talks, and one of them is about, okay, well, it depends on whether the word is based on my research, whether it was a content versus a function word, whether it was a short or long word, whether you know the meaning or you don't know the meaning, and whether you learn those graphophonetic connections or not. That is going to tell us how many exposures you need to that word in order to learn it. And then you could you could add to that equation, or you could create a new equation that I sometimes use, which is like, just think about the orthography of a word, think about what your phonics scope and sequence is, so that's an interaction, and then you're thinking about what the school level interaction is. Like, has there been vertical alignment throughout the schools from kindergarten to first to second and on up? And then what is the teacher's depth of knowledge? Is the teacher able to lean into a phonetic concept that hasn't been learned yet, but will be learned in the upcoming months or next year, and can she capitalize on that teachable moment? All of those directions in those two equations come into play in that one moment when the student is trying to read the word laugh. Right?
I'm kind of giggling because when I mentioned that I was listening to Nicole Patton-Terry in one of her presentations at a conference in Perth just like days ago. And she is saying something so similar about just the complexity. It's like, you've got all this stuff going on in your head as a teacher. It is not an easy task, And so, one of my leader colleagues here in New Zealand, she said, we have to realise that teachers can't hold all of that science in their head. We've got to give them a way to be able to move forward with their instruction to minimise their cognitive load so they can pay attention to the students that are sitting across from them. So that's where having a well-curated lesson sequence, a quality scope and sequence, and supporting resources and working through that structure is such a great starting point for all of us here in New Zealand.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, it is on all of us, outside of the classrooms, to ensure that we are providing teachers with high quality resources that align to the research, right? So that they can do their jobs. They have the most important jobs. They can do it much easier than what we're asking them to do right now, which is to whip up a great phonics scope and sequence with all these word analysis approaches from day to day. I mean, I was a teacher. It was the most difficult job I've ever had. Very challenging.
Oh my goodness, Katie, I've really enjoyed it. I feel like we could just chat all day, but we can't do that. You've got a life, and these people who are joining us have also, most of them will have just had to jump out actually into their classrooms, which is amazing. I'm going to hand to you to kind of wrap up this chit chat with what is one of your favourite practical tips that you could gift teachers, or educators that are helping students who are either strugglers or those emergent word readers?
The most tip, I feel redundant, but I think it's setting students up for mastery with a small set of letter sound correspondences. They don't have to have mastered the entire alphabet until they do this, right? It's like, give them a set, make sure they know that set really well, and start working on combinations. And I think it's going to bring a lot of joy to the learning for both the student and for the teacher. And that's another thing too, is like teachers are often very joyful people. They want to enjoy this experience they're having with their students. The students want to enjoy it. And so I just hope that could add to some of the fun that we can see in classrooms.
Yeah,
everyone's having fun when people feel successful.
And I feel when we hear these insights or recommendations from people such as yourself, who are so highly regarded in this research base, it actually affords teachers the opportunity to breathe and let their shoulders down and go, it's okay for me to go slow with the student and work through this and provide multiple repetitions, because fundamentally I now understand that this baseline I'm building for the student is going to be such a strong platform for them going forward.
I couldn't agree with you. That's really what I should have. That is exactly right. It's like you set them up for the Matthew effect.
Yeah,
Everyone knows that.
Yes,
the Matthew
yes.
effect, right? The rich get richer with regards to reading. I really feel like through pre-K and K, which right now in the U.S. is when we're not really teaching all that much with regards to word analysis.
Right.
I take the exact opposite approach. It's like if you did letter, sound, and word analysis really well during those years, I think that, well, I don't think, I know because I see it in the data, right, and in my intervention work, those kids take off. It's like we just gave them all the tools they needed. And then all those things we talked about, the statistical learning, all that really, they're set up for success. It clicks in, and it's great. So I couldn't agree with you more.
Thank you so much, Katie, for taking the time to beam into New Zealand and share your work and your insights with us. We really, really, really do appreciate it. For those that have joined with us, I just wanted to let everybody know that the tickets for our Cultivating the Literacy Landscape Symposium will be going live in the next week or so. We're very fortunate, Katie, to be bringing Dr. Carolyn Strom, a leading a leading Australian principal, and the esteemed Dr. Anita Archer to New Zealand later this year to present at one of our conferences. So pretty excited about that. And then also for our followers, on the 2nd of April, we've got some really exciting activity happening with our Ideal Tour and then a Limit Tour. So check out the different Facebook events and see what's happening there. So I just want to say again, Katie, thank you so much. And I know that everybody who's been listening will have found this chat really useful, irrespective of where they are on their journey of implementing evidence-based, high-impact literacy instruction.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.